A forest exists where every dream takes physical form. Elara, a young cartographer who can walk through dreams, must enter this place known as the Whispering Woods. Her mentor has vanished within its borders, and she is the only one with the power to find him. The woods are a realm of constant change, where geography is born from thought and memory. To map it is to risk her own mind, for failure could shatter the delicate balance between our world and the world of dreams. You will follow her journey into a living landscape of wonder and lurking peril, discovering if one person's courage can chart the unknown. What is the true price of exploring a world made entirely of thought? The air itself hummed as Elara stepped across the threshold. Her boots met not soil, but a soft, resilient moss that glowed with a faint inner light. Before her, a river barred the way, but it was a river of impossible beauty, flowing not with water, but with a thick, shimmering substance that looked like liquid starlight. This was the first tangible dream, and her training took over. With a steady hand, she unrolled her finest parchment and selected her silver-nibbed pen, determined to capture this wonder. Yet the moment her pen touched the page to trace the river's course, the ink seemed to writhe with a life of its own. The line she drew for the bank twisted into a spiral, and the carefully stippled stars on her map began to migrate across the parchment, rearranging themselves into constellations she did not recognize. The map was not a record, it was a living, breathing thing, reacting to the forest in real time. A profound silence fell, the kind that feels heavy and watchful. From the corner of her eye, she sensed a shift in the deep shadows between the trees, a stillness that was too deliberate, a presence that had been passive and was now keenly aware of her intrusion. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Could she trust her own eyes, or was the forest feeding her illusions? Every instinct as a cartographer screamed to rely on her tools, on the objective truth of the map, but the map itself had become a liar. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to soften and harden in subtle pulses, as if the forest was breathing, and it was resisting her attempt to pin it down. The choice was stark: turn back now or abandon the one thing that had always defined her. Clenching her jaw, she rolled the treacherous parchment shut and secured her tools. She would have to trust her instincts, not her instruments. Pushing forward, she left the river of starlight behind, a choice that felt less like moving and more like being permitted to proceed. The stakes were no longer just about finding her mentor, but about navigating the will of the forest itself, a conscious entity that might have allowed her teacher to become lost forever. As the shimmering light faded, a new path unspooled before her, woven not from dirt or stone, but from the haunting, familiar melodies of forgotten lullabies. The tune pulled at a deep, childhood memory, and the path led insistently toward a grove where the air itself thickened with the scent of old books and lost afternoons, a place where memories were not just recalled, but took root and grew. The Path of Lullabies led Elara into a grove of impossible trees. Their bark was smooth and pale as polished bone, and embedded deep within their translucent surfaces were thousands of crystalline shards, each one pulsing with a soft, captured light. These were not leaves, but memories, the rooted dreams of countless sleepers. One crystal, larger than the rest and veined with sorrow, called to her. Compelled, she pressed her palm against the cold, smooth bark. The grove dissolved. Suddenly, she was a child, small and breathless, running across a sun-drenched field. The ground fell away, and she was soaring, not on wings, but on pure, unadulterated joy, the wind a silent roar in her ears as she climbed toward the clouds. It was a dream of flight, a memory of a feeling so potent it brought tears to her own eyes. The moment the feeling crested, the grove snapped back into focus, but it was changed. The trees had physically leaned away from her, their branches arching upward as if straining for the sky, the very geography of the place reshaped by the echo of that single, beautiful dream. A violent tremor ripped through the ground. From the trunk of the very tree she had touched, the bark splintered and groaned, peeling back to reveal not wood, but a swirling, dark substance, the color of a deep bruise. It coalesced into a form, a beast of shadow and sharp angles, with eyes that glowed with the cold fire of profound regret. It was a guardian, a manifestation of the fear that such a perfect memory could be lost or tarnished, and it saw Elara's intrusion as a direct threat. The creature loomed over her, its form casting a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. To fight back was unthinkable. The grove was a cathedral of fragile glass, and a single misstep could shatter a dream, erasing a piece of a real person's past forever. Her cartographer's mind, which moments before had screamed to document and capture, now understood a different truth. This place did not need to be mapped, it needed to be understood. Her hand went to her satchel, not for parchment, but for a single, broad leaf that had fallen at her feet. With a piece of charcoal, she did not draw boundaries or landmarks. Instead, she sketched a map of solace, tracing the gentle curve of a hill under a setting sun, the quiet path leading to a safe and welcoming hearth. It was a cartography of feeling, a guide not to a place, but to a state of peace. She held the leaf out, not as a challenge, but as an offering. The beast of regret hesitated, its glowing eyes fixed on the simple drawing. The cold anger in its gaze seemed to soften, the sharp edges of its form blurring as it absorbed the quiet intention of her map. A low, resonant hum replaced the menacing growl, a sound of acknowledgement. The threat had passed, not through force, but through empathy. The creature did not vanish. Instead, it turned its massive head, one long, shadowy claw, extending to point deeper into the woods, toward a great rift in the earth, from which a chaotic symphony of whispers and half-formed images spilled forth. It was a canyon of echoes, a place where unfinished dreams gathered in a turbulent, restless torrent. Her path was clear, but the danger had magnified 1,000-fold. To find her mentor, she would have to navigate a storm of broken hopes and abandoned fantasies, where every step risked unraveling a life half lived in slumber. The canyon's edge crumbled beneath her feet, plunging Elara into a vertigo of sound and sensation. It was not a descent into quiet rock, but into a roaring tide of thought. All around her, dreams played out like fragments of 1,000 broken plays, repeating their opening lines and tragic finales in an endless, maddening loop. A soldier relived a single moment of hesitation. A poet struggled to recall the perfect word. A child endlessly reached for a toy, just beyond their grasp. The air was thick with the bitter taste of regret and the sweet ache of longing. To cross this chasm of despair, she could not simply walk. She had to build. Focusing on the few, resilient dreams that pulsed with undimmed hope, she began her work. With her charcoal and parchment, she did not draw a line, but a structure. She charted the rhythmic pulses of a dream where a gardener, against all odds, always believed his seeds would sprout. She mapped the steady, unwavering light from a dream of a lighthouse keeper, maintaining his vigil. These were not grand fantasies, but quiet, persistent hopes, and as she documented their patterns, something miraculous happened. The very substance of those hopes began to coalesce, hardening in the air like crystallized amber, forming a narrow, shimmering bridge across the abyss. Her cartography, however, was a beacon in the chaos. From the swirling mists of stagnant dreams, pale, spectral forms detached themselves, echo wraiths. They had no faces, only hollows where faces should be, and they moved with the whispering rustle of pages, torn from a book and forgotten. They did not attack with claw or tooth, but with voice, their words weaving into the fabric of her own mind. "You are lost," they whispered, the sound echoing the canyon's own despair. "Your mentor is gone. Your maps are lies. You will fail here as he did." The words struck with the force of physical blows, each one feeding on her deepest fear, the fear that her entire quest was a monument to her own arrogance. The bridge beneath her feet wavered, its hopeful light flickering as her own resolve wavered. She felt a terrifying pull, an urge to simply sit down on the bridge and listen, to let her own story dissolve into the endless, repeating chorus. Clutching her satchel, she fought back not with a shout, but with a memory. She remembered the weight of her first successful map, the scent of ink and pride, the steady hand of her mentor guiding her own. This was not arrogance, it was purpose. She anchored herself to that truth, and the bridge solidified anew, but to merely resist was not enough. She had to break the cycle. Her eyes fell upon one of the most painful loops, a dream where a woman watched a distant ship sail away, forever, her hand perpetually raised in a farewell that never ended. The sorrow pouring from this single echo was a keystone of the canyon's despair. Elara acted, flipping to a new page, her charcoal flew. She did not copy the scene, she rewrote its ending. In swift, bold strokes, she sketched not a departing ship, but a returning one, larger and grander, its sails filled with a favorable wind. She drew the woman's face, not turned away in grief, but alight with recognition and overwhelming joy. She held the map aloft, and the power of that alternative narrative shot through the canyon like a lightning strike. The loop of the woman's dream shattered. The endless farewell ceased, replaced by a single, triumphant cry of reunion that echoed once cleanly and then fell silent. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The echo wraiths, deprived of their sustenance, let out a chorus of silent screams, their forms unraveling into meaningless mist, but their defeat came at a cost. The entire canyon trembled, the very fabric of the place groaning in protest. In that moment of upheaval, Elara felt a profound and unsettling connection. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the woman sleeping in the world beyond would now wake with a different memory, a new hope etched into her soul. Her intervention was not just observation, it was permanent alteration. As the tremors subsided, the chaotic symphony of the canyon softened into a low, respectful hum. The shattered loops did not reform. Before her, the mists of despair parted, and a single, solid path of gleaming quartz, pushed its way forward, a road forged from her own hard-won resolve. It led away from the noise, down to the shores of a vast, perfectly still lake whose dark waters drank the very light from the air. This was where dreams, too painful or too trivial to be sustained, were gently laid to rest, sinking into a silence more absolute than any she had yet encountered. The lake's surface was a flawless obsidian mirror, reflecting nothing, not even the faint light from the dream trees high above. An unnatural quiet hung in the air, the kind that follows a long-held breath. This was the Lake of Lethe, the final repository for dreams too fragile, too painful, or simply too forgotten to endure. Elara watched as a single, shimmering bubble of light drifted lazily over the dark water, its soft glow flickering like a dying ember before it winked out, dissolving into the absolute silence below. Then she saw it. Trapped among a cluster of fading dreams was one that pulsed with a familiar, stubborn energy, a signature she knew as well as her own. It was a fragment of her mentor's presence. To retrieve it, she would have to enter the water. The moment her boots broke the surface, a cold numbness shot up her legs, a feeling that was less about temperature and more about the slow erosion of thought. Wading deeper, the water clung to her like thick syrup, each step requiring immense effort as a low, pervasive hum filled her mind, a soothing but insistent lullaby of forgetting. She focused on the glowing bubble, on the memory of her mentor's patient smile, using it as an anchor against the tide of oblivion. Her fingers closed around the fragile sphere. A jolt of recognition, of pure, unadulterated hope, surged through her, but the lake demanded a price. As she pulled the dream from the water, a recent, cherished memory of her own was ripped from her mind in exchange. The triumphant feeling of building the bridge across the canyon of echoes simply vanished, leaving behind a hollow, disorienting blankness. She stumbled back to the shore, clutching the salvaged dream, but feeling a profound part of herself had been amputated. A figure materialized from the mist, not as a beast of shadow, but as a being of serene, unsettling calm. Its form was like smoothed, water-worn glass, and its voice was the soft sound of a page turning. "You have taken what was given to the silence," it stated, its tone devoid of anger, yet absolute. "That which is forgotten has earned its rest. To reclaim it unravels a balance you cannot comprehend." Elara's mind felt frayed, the gap where her memory had been a raw and aching wound. The urge to surrender, to sit on the pebbled shore and let the lake's hum wash away all her fears and burdens, was almost overwhelming. What was the point of finding one man if she lost every reason she had for seeking him? But she looked at the rescued dream, cradled in her palm, and saw the faint image of a compass rose etched in starlight within it, her mentor's personal symbol. He was still fighting. He had left this clue for her, believing she would come. She could not let his faith be another dream lost to this lake. With a resolve that felt brittle but unwavering, she met the guardian's placid gaze. "I will not leave a debt unpaid," she said, her voice trembling but clear. She reached into the remaining tapestry of her own mind, past the fresh void, and found a thread of pure gold. The memory of the first time she successfully navigated a complex star chart entirely on her own, a moment of perfect, solitary triumph. She offered it to the guardian, holding the vivid feeling out in her open hand. "Take this in its place." The guardian studied her, the placid surface of its form rippling with what might have been surprise. It inclined its head, a slow, graceful motion. The exchange is acceptable, your joy for his hope. The weight of the offered memory lifted from her, and with it went the vibrant, electric feeling of that personal victory. She was now doubly diminished, a cartographer with missing pieces of her own map, but the rescued dream in her hand glowed brighter, solidifying into a tangible clue. As the Guardian dissolved back into the mist, Elara felt a new and chilling attention fall upon her from the surrounding woods. Something ancient and hungry had noted the transaction, had tasted the potent sacrifice of a willingly given joyful memory, and now regarded her not as an intruder, but as a vessel of rare and desirable treasures. The clue pulsed in her hand, its energy pulling her gaze upward, toward a distant, jagged peak, where the very air seemed to crackle with nascent potential. This was the cradle, the source where new dreams were born. But as she began her climb, a bitter wind swept down from the heights, carrying not the gentle whispers of sleep, but the sharp, warning scent of ozone and the guttural promise of a coming storm. The climb up Genesis Peak was a battle against creation itself. Jagged rocks shifted under her feet, not with the looseness of scree, but with the restless energy of unformed thoughts. The air crackled, alive with nascent dreams sparking into being around her like silent fireworks. One, a fledgling dream of a fledgling bird, was caught in a vicious updraft of its own fear, tumbling end over end in a panic, unable to find the stability to fly. Elara's cartographer instincts ignited. This was not a place to be recorded, it was a process to be guided. She dropped to one knee, her last piece of pristine parchment spread against the storm-worn rock. Her charcoal moved not to capture a landscape, but to chart a possibility. She drew a gentle, rising thermal, a clear path through the turbulent air, a map of calm confidence for a dream that had only known chaos. The struggling spark latched onto the intention behind her lines. It stopped tumbling, steadied itself, and then, with a burst of pure, joyous light, it soared upward on the path she had drawn, its form solidifying into a perfect, shimmering swallow. A profound quiet fell, but only for a moment. Then, a cascade of newborn dreams, each a tiny, hopeful ember, swarmed around her. They did not attack or flee. They brushed against her, their collective warmth weaving a temporary, shimmering shield of positive energy around her shoulders. It was a gift, an acknowledgement from the forest itself that she was not just an observer, but a participant. Yet the peace was fragile. The very act of nurturing this life drew the attention of the peak's immune system. A violent dream storm descended, a howling gale, not of wind, but of raw, unprocessed anxiety and forgotten nightmares. It scoured the mountainside, intent on wiping the slate clean, and her new shield flickered under the assault. Could she truly protect anything here? Her entire training was based on detachment, on observing without interfering. To nurture felt like a violation of a sacred rule, an arrogance that could unravel everything. Another cluster of newborn dreams, simple visions of blooming flowers and quiet streams, trembled before the storm's advance. The path to the summit was clear, her mentor's clue pulling her onward with desperate urgency. Every second she delayed felt like a betrayal, but leaving these fragile sparks to be extinguished felt like a deeper betrayal of the purpose she was only just discovering. Gritting her teeth against the shrieking gale, she made her choice. She turned her back on the direct route, and began to guide the fledgling dreams, using her own body and the faint light of her shield to shepherd them toward a sheltered overhang, a cartographer leading a convoy of light to safety. The storm redoubled its fury, the chaotic winds tearing at her clothes and her resolve. This was not a natural weather pattern. It was a directed attack, a symptom of a sickness festering in the forest's very core. As the last dream found shelter, the storm abruptly lessened, as if its attention had been pulled elsewhere. From her high vantage point, drenched and breathless, Elara's gaze was drawn to the heart of the Whispering Woods. There, amidst the vibrant tapestry of dreaming trees, stood a single, gnarled monstrosity. Its bark was black and cracked, and from its twisted branches hung not crystalline memories, but withered, fruit-like orbs that pulsed with a sickly, possessive light. A cold dread, colder than the waters of the Lethe, settled in her stomach. That was the source of the turmoil. That was where her mentor was trapped. And she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that her final map would not be one of guidance or solace, but of confrontation. The Heartwood Tree stood as a monument to sorrow, its blackened bark a tapestry of ancient pain. Up close, the patterns were not random cracks, but a language, a cartography of Genesis, carved into the very soul of the forest. Elara traced the grooves with her fingertips, her mind translating the spirals and jagged lines. She saw the first dream taking root, a single point of light in an endless void. She witnessed the first cartographer, a figure of pure shadow and starlight, who had given the chaotic dream stuff its first forms, its basic rules of geography. Then she saw the schism, the moment a dream of profound, possessive love curdled into something darker, a nightmare that threatened to consume all others. The first cartographer had not destroyed it, but had sacrificed a part of his own essence to weave a prison around it, a perpetual containment that required a warden. Her mentor had not merely gotten lost, he had taken up that lonely vigil. The bark beneath her hands grew warm, the patterns shifting to form a new, terrifying image. She saw her mentor, not as a captive, but as the very lock on the prison door, his own consciousness woven into the bars that held the ancient nightmare at bay. To pull him free would be to shatter the lock. The Heartwood's consciousness, ancient and weary, pressed against her mind. Its message was not one of malice, but of tragic necessity. Some dreams are too dangerous to be altered. Some stories must remain unfinished for the whole to survive. Her desire to save one man was a beautiful, foolish dream in itself, one that risked unleashing a horror upon countless sleeping minds. Could she truly choose the abstract safety of the many over the tangible life of the one person who had believed in her? The cartographer in her saw the logical, devastating equation. The student, the friend, rebelled against it. There had to be another way, a map that led to a different outcome. She looked from the image of her trapped mentor back to the ancient, knowing bark of the Heartwood. She was not the first cartographer. She did not have to follow the same paths. I will find another way, she whispered to the tree. I accept the burden of knowing. A single luminous seed, like a tear of solidified moonlight, detached from a high branch and floated into her open palm. The moment it touched her skin, it dissolved, and a flood of understanding seared through her. She felt the countless threads of the forest, the delicate balance of every sleeping thought, and the constant, gnawing pressure of the thing in the prison, a presence of pure, ravenous hunger. The seed had not given her a solution, but a context so vast it was crushing. Her connection to the Whispering Woods was now permanent and profound. Its fate was inextricably tied to her own. She turned from the Heartwood, the weight of centuries on her shoulders. The path to the prison was no longer just a route on a map, but a narrowing toward an inevitable choice. The very air grew thick and heavy, the vibrant colors of the surrounding dreams leaching away into monochrome shades of gray. The trees themselves seemed to lean away from her, their whispers falling silent as she walked deeper into a silence that felt like condemnation. The Labyrinth of Thorns did not look like a structure, but a seizure of the landscape. Walls of jagged, black bramble erupted from the ground, twisting and knotting into a maze that pulsed with a low, hostile energy. Each thorn was a sliver of crystallized fear, and the entire structure seemed to breathe, its passages constricting and expanding like a vast, diseased lung. This was the prison's immune system, a physical manifestation of its desperate need to remain sealed. Elara stepped inside, and the thorns immediately began to shift, grinding against one another with the sound of breaking bones, rewriting the path behind her. To navigate this, her old methods were useless. She could not map the corridors, for they were never the same from one moment to the next. Instead, she focused on the patterns of the thorns themselves. Holding the Heartwood seed tight in her palm, she let its quiet resonance guide her eyes. She saw that the aggressive, lashing growths were born from spikes of panic, while the slower, more deliberate shifts were rooted in deep, lingering dread. She began to chart not the maze, but its emotional weather. When a wall of thorns surged toward her, she did not retreat. She held up the seed, projecting a map of stillness she drew in her mind, a simple circle of calm. The thorns, sensing the ancient authority of the Heartwood, would hesitate, their sharp points drooping like wilted flowers before slowly retracting. Each small victory, however, made the labyrinth angrier. The ground trembled, and the shrieking of grinding brambles intensified, and then she saw them. Frozen within the thorny walls were other cartographers. Their bodies were encased in the black wood, their faces locked in final moments of terror and despair, their maps clutched in petrified hands. They were grim statues, a gallery of her possible futures. The fear was a cold stone in her throat. Was this her mentor's fate, or hers? One statue, a woman with a silver compass pendant, still gleaming faintly, seemed to call to her. Trapped within the thorns near the woman's heart was a small, fading dream, a simple sketch of a cozy fireplace and a waiting chair. It was a dream of home, of safety, the very thing the prison had perverted into a trap. To free the cartographer would be to redirect the labyrinth's energy, a potentially catastrophic risk, but to leave her felt like a surrender to the prison's logic. Elara made her choice. Pressing her parchment against the thorns, she used the last of her charcoal to not trace, but to restore. She redrew the dream of the hearth, pouring her own memory of warmth and safety into the lines, making it brighter and more vivid than the captured version. The thorns binding the statue glowed white-hot, and with a sound like shattering glass, they recoiled. The petrified form of the cartographer crumbled to dust, but her spirit, a wisp of silver light, emerged. The spirit did not speak with words, but with impressions that bloomed in Elara's mind: gratitude and a dire warning. It had been a warden of pure fear that had captured her, a consciousness born from the prison's core, and it was now acutely aware of Elara's meddling. The silver spirit floated ahead, a fleeting guide that highlighted safe passages for a few precious seconds before the labyrinth, enraged by this theft, sealed them shut again. The path was closing in. Finally, the thrashing brambles parted, not into an exit, but into a clearing. There, in the center, hung her mentor. He was suspended in a cage of shimmering, amber-like crystal that pulsed with a sickly light. It was not a prison of stone, but of crystallized anxiety, feeding on his every worried thought to strengthen its bars. And from the deep shadows at the edge of the clearing, a new form began to detach itself. It was the absence of light, the silence in a scream, the warden, and it turned its hollow gaze upon her. The Warden of Fear was not a beast but a void, a shifting silhouette that drank the light from the air and the warmth from her bones. It had no fixed form, instead rippling through a horrifying gallery of her deepest anxieties. One moment, it was her mentor, turning to her with eyes full of disappointment. The next, it was her own reflection, aged and broken, holding a map of nothing but blank, empty spaces. Each form was a lie, but the terror they carried was devastatingly real. Elara did not raise a weapon. She raised her maps. The parchment unrolled in her mind first, a blueprint of defiance. She cast the memory of the bridge she had built across the canyon of echoes, the bridge woven from quiet, persistent hopes. A shimmering path of golden light solidified on the ground before her, and when the warden stepped onto it, its form flickered, the image of her broken self distorting as if seen through troubled water. The path was a zone of safety, a place where fear could not take root. She followed with the map of solace she had offered the beast of regret, expanding its borders until the air around her hummed with a profound, protective calm. The warden recoiled, its edges fraying. It was working. Her cartography was not just recording reality here, it was dictating it, physically reshaping the small clearing into a fortress of courage. But every act of creation had its equal reaction. A deep, guttural roar erupted from the heart of the prison, a sound of rending stone and splintering dreams. The crystallized cage holding her mentor rattled violently, its amber light flaring a frantic, warning red. The ancient nightmare within felt its warden weakening and was now straining against its bonds with renewed, desperate fury. The warden seized on this escalation. It ceased its shifting and became a pure, concentrated point of her most potent fear. The fear that her quest would end with her mentor, shattered before her eyes, lost because of her own actions. The despair it projected was a physical weight, pushing her to her knees. Her own breath felt like shards of glass in her lungs. To destroy this thing felt like the only option, to erase fear itself. But the wisdom of the Heartwood seed pulsed in her palm, a quiet, insistent truth. Fear was not the enemy. It was a part of the forest, a part of every dreamer. To destroy the warden would be to create a void, an imbalance that the ravenous nightmare would instantly fill. Gasping against the pressure, she made her choice. She would not destroy, she would integrate. Her hands moved, not with the bold strokes of battle, but with the delicate precision of a master cartographer, finalizing a masterpiece. She began to draw a new map, not of a place, but of a state of being. She charted the jagged coastline of fear right alongside the calm bays of courage. She placed the treacherous swamps of anxiety next to the solid ground of resolve. It was a map of balance, a cartography that accepted the shadow as necessary for the light to have meaning. She offered this map to the Warden. The entity of pure fear hesitated, then flowed over the parchment. Instead of rejecting it, the map absorbed the Warden, its dark essence seeping into the drawn lines of the treacherous coastline and the deep forests of doubt, giving them form and context. The oppressive weight in the clearing vanished. The Warden was neutralized, its chaotic energy now a structured, contained part of the landscape of the mind. But the peace was momentary. With its guardian integrated, the prison lost its final, failing defense. A thunderous crack split the air as a web of fractures raced up the walls of the Labyrinth of Thorns. The core of the prison, the ancient nightmare of consumption, was now fully awake and tearing itself free. Elara lunged forward, scrambling across the trembling ground toward her mentor's crystal cage. The final race against oblivion now begun. The cage of crystallized anxiety hummed with a desperate energy. Inside, Elara's mentor, Aaron, was a ghost of the man she remembered, his form flickering as the prison fed on his worry. His eyes, when they met hers, held not relief, but a profound and weary fear. He had held this line for so long, he had forgotten any other existence was possible. Elara pressed her hands against the warm, amber-like crystal, the heartwood seed in her palm glowing in response. She did not try to break the cage. Instead, she poured her understanding into it, using the seed's connection to grow a slender, living bridge of light directly into his mind. She showed him the bridge of hope she had built, the solace she had offered the beast of regret, the fledgling dreams she had saved. She showed him that his sacrifice was noble, but it was no longer the only way. The forest had a new cartographer, and she refused to accept a world that demanded his perpetual suffering. For a long, agonizing moment, Aaron resisted, the cage's bars glowing brighter as it fed on his hesitation. Then, a spark of his old self ignited within his weary eyes. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his spirit, and grasped the bridge she had offered. Together, from the inside and the outside, they mapped the prison's flaws, tracing the hairline fractures of doubt that were also its points of failure. With a shared, silent command, they poured not force, but the simple, undeniable truth of their reunion into those cracks. The cage did not explode. It dissolved, shattering into a cloud of golden dust that hung glittering in the air. For one breathtaking second, Aaron was free, and the released energy of his long-contained dreams burst forth in a wave of pure, radiant light. But that light was the very fuel the ancient nightmare had been starving for. The wave of hope was instantly devoured, absorbed by the ravenous darkness at the clearing's edge. The formless hunger coalesced, pulling the shimmering dust and the surrounding shadows into itself, weaving a body from stolen dreams and perverted light. It grew, towering over them, a monstrous entity with a gaping maw that seemed to drain the color from the world. Beautiful dream trees at the edge of the labyrinth instantly withered, their crystalline memories blackening and cracking. The very air grew thin and cold as the nightmare began to consume the forest's vitality. Aaron staggered, his form already growing translucent. He had spent centuries as the lock, and his own dream-walking power was the last tether holding this horror back. He looked at Elara, his expression now one of absolute clarity and resolve. He had given so much, but he would give this last piece willingly. "I can give you moments," he said, his voice already fading. "I will be the dam, but you must find the river's new course." He raised his hands, and the last of his power flowed out, not as an attack, but as a brilliant, shimmering wall that slammed into the advancing nightmare, containing its immediate growth in a temporary, straining sphere of light. The forest's death rattle softened to a pained groan. It was a stay of execution, nothing more. "Go to the Constellation Archive," Aaron urged, his form flickering like a guttering candle. "Find the oldest map." The first cartographer did not just contain this thing, he understood it. The answer is not in a stronger prison, but in a different kind of story. As his spectral form began to dissolve entirely into the barrier he had created, his final act was to point a fading finger toward the highest branches of the dreamscape, where the oldest memories of the sky were kept. The sky itself remembered. Elara raced into the cavern of the Constellation Archive, and her breath caught in her throat. Above her, the cavern ceiling was not stone, but a perfect, velvety blackness in which countless points of light swirled in slow, silent orbits. Each was a dream, a story mapped and set among the stars. The air hummed with the collective whisper of a billion sleeping minds. Her goal was the oldest light, the original cartographer's design, woven into the very fabric of this celestial tapestry. But the archive was not a passive library. As she stepped onto a narrow bridge of solidified starlight that spanned the cosmic expanse, the constellations shifted. Guardians of living light, forms of woven nebula, and sharp-edged star clusters detached from the ceiling and circled her. They did not speak, but their movements were a challenge, a test of intent. To find the prime map, she would have to prove she understood its purpose was not control, but stewardship. Her hands trembled as she reached out, not with a pen, but with her will, trying to coax the ancient patterns into alignment. The first constellation she touched, a spiral of blue-white stars representing a dream of endless ocean, resisted her. A jolt of psychic fatigue shot up her arms, a deep ache that settled in her bones. She was trying to read a language written before time, and each symbol demanded a piece of her energy. Doubt clawed at her. What if finding this map did not save the forest, but reset it? What if all the beautiful, fragile dreams she had nurtured, from the fledgling bird to the rescued memory, were wiped away as if they had never been? The cost of knowledge felt terrifyingly high. She pushed the fear down. She remembered the Warden of Fear and how she had not fought it, but had given it a place on her map. She would not command this archive. She would ask for its help. Focusing all her remaining strength, she did not try to force the stars. Instead, she spoke the true name of the forest, the name the Heartwood had given her, a single, resonant word that meant both beginning and promise. The sound was not loud, but it echoed through the cavern with the weight of epochs. The swirling guardians halted their menacing dance. Their forms softened, the sharp starlight blurring into gentle radiance. They floated toward her, not as wardens, but as guides, their light coalescing to illuminate a specific series of constellations, a key, a lock, and a great, binding circle. As the patterns slid into their final, perfect alignment, the knowledge she sought flooded into her. She saw it. The first cartographer had not merely imprisoned the nightmare. He had tried to bind it by offering it a story, a narrative of solitude and guardianship, a role it had violently rejected. The current method, the one that had trapped Aaron, was a brute force containment born of that failure. The true way to rebind it was to offer it a new story, one it would willingly accept, but such a profound rewriting of a fundamental entity required a permanent anchor. A willing dreamer would have to take the nightmare into themselves, not as a prisoner, but as a part of their own consciousness, forever. They would become the new vessel, the living map that contained the storm. The weight of this revelation was heavier than any physical burden. She now held the power to save the forest, but the price was a soul. With this terrible knowledge burning in her mind, she turned from the shimmering archive and began the descent back to the Heartwood, where the final, impossible choice awaited. The Heartwood's bark was warm and alive beneath Elara's palms. With the ancient constellation map burning behind her eyes, she raised her silver-nibbed pen, its tip now glowing with the cold fire of the archive. This was not an act of recording, but of rewriting reality itself. Each symbol she carved into the ancient tree was not ink, but a thread of her own will, a stitch in a new story for the forest. As she worked, channeling the power of the first cartographer, a deep, resonant hum began to emanate from the Heartwood. The pull was immense. Across the clearing, the formless nightmare of consumption shuddered, its stolen light straining backward, drawn toward the tree like iron to a lodestone. The ground beneath their feet buckled, and the air filled with the sound of splintering crystal, as nearby dream trees fractured under the strain. The nightmare fought back not with claws, but with thought. Visions erupted in Elara's mind. She saw her maps curling to ash, the forest withering into dust, Aaron's face contorted in a final, accusing scream. Each psychic assault was a hammer blow to her concentration, a temptation to let go and surrender to the despair. Her hands trembled, the glowing line of a binding rune wavering. Just a few feet away, Aaron was a bastion of fading light, his hands raised as he poured the last dregs of his spectral energy into maintaining a fragile perimeter around them, a final shield against the nightmare's physical fury. He was the dam, but the flood was winning. He met Elara's gaze through the chaos, and in that shared look, a final, silent understanding passed between them. He saw the terrible cost of the true binding, the anchor it demanded, written plainly in her exhausted eyes. He had already given his freedom. Now he would give his story. With a last surge of power that made his form blaze like a star, Aaron turned from the perimeter and stepped into the Heartwood itself. His spirit merged with the tree, his consciousness weaving into the very symbols Elara was carving. He was not being imprisoned. He was becoming the prison. He was offering his own soul as the vessel, the permanent anchor for the nightmare, the living map that would contain the storm forever. The sacrifice was absolute. The connection to his waking self, the man who had taught her everything, was severed in an instant. The nightmare gave one last, deafening roar of protest as it was wrenched from the air and violently drawn into the Heartwood, its dark essence sealed within the tapestry of Aaron's eternal vigil. A profound silence fell, heavier than any that had come before. Then, a wave of pure, healing light erupted from the Heartwood, a gentle, unstoppable tide that washed over the broken landscape. The splintered dream trees knit themselves back together, their leaves shimmering with renewed vigor. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by the warm, gentle hum of a world restored. Elara stood alone, her pen falling from numb fingers. The forest was saved, its future secured, but the cost was a void in her own heart that felt deeper than any canyon. She had her answers, but she had lost her guide. The responsibility for this living, breathing world of dreams now rested solely on her shoulders. She placed a hand on the warm, quiet bark of the heartwood, feeling the faint, steady pulse of the two ancient, opposing forces now bound within it. A single, luminous leaf, identical to the seed she had been given, drifted down and settled in her open palm. It was not a burden passed, but a title conferred. She was the Cartographer of Dreams, and the entire, whispering woods was now her map to tend. The forest breathed a sigh of relief that was almost audible. Elara walked through groves where the air itself seemed to sparkle with renewed vitality. Her footsteps no longer an intrusion, but a welcomed part of the landscape's rhythm. Yet the vibrant colors and gentle hum of contented dreams could not completely fill the quiet space Erin had left behind. Her grief was a private, quiet companion, a dull ache that flared whenever she saw a particularly clever constellation of dream, light, or a beautifully twisted route she knew he would have loved to chart. She channeled that feeling into her work, where a dream of a tranquil pond had been fractured by the nightmare's touch, leaving its waters choppy and fearful. She did not simply observe. She knelt and sketched a new, stronger shoreline on a leaf of living bark, her lines reinforcing the dream's own memory of stillness until the water grew calm and clear once more. She found wayward dreams, sparks of light confused by the recent chaos, and gently guided them with simple, hand-drawn maps back to their intended paths, whether that was a child's recurring fantasy of a friendly dragon or an artist's vision of a cathedral made of light. Her compassion became a tangible force, woven into the very soil. The forest, in turn, began to mirror her inner balance. Trees that had once grown in random, chaotic patterns now arranged themselves in harmonious spirals. Flowers bloomed in colors that shifted to soothe the weary mind, and the whispers from the leaves carried fragments of encouraging poetry. It was more resilient, more beautiful, because it had absorbed not just her skill, but her heart. This new, profound symbiosis demanded a new purpose. The old ways of detached exploration were a relic of a more fragile age. She decided then to found a new tradition. Cartographers would no longer be mere explorers who charted these realms and left. They would be guardians, stewards dedicated to nurturing the dreamscape's health. And she would start by teaching the dream entities themselves. She gathered the sentient echoes of the woods, the memory keepers, and the hope weavers, and showed them how to map their own emotional currents, to understand the geography of their own being, so they could maintain their own balance. Word of the forest's miraculous rebirth and its new guardian traveled along paths that only dream walkers can tread. One by one, they arrived at the edge of the whispering woods. Some were young and eager, their eyes wide with the wonder Elara once held. Others were old and weary, veterans of other, less forgiving dreamscapes, seeking the wisdom that had healed this one. They looked to her not just for maps, but for guidance. The stakes of her role magnified instantly. She was no longer just tending to a forest. She was shaping the future of dream walking itself. As the first of these pupils gathered around her in a clearing woven from solidified moonlight, a familiar warmth brushed against her mind. It was not a voice, but a feeling, a whisper of pure essence emanating from the distant heartwood. It was a reassurance, a gentle pressure like a hand on her shoulder, carrying a simple, profound message. You are not alone. I am here. And in that moment, she knew Erin's spirit was not gone, but had become the forest's most steadfast sentinel, watching over her and the new world they had saved together. The Starlight River flowed with its familiar, impossible grace, a perfect canvas for the first lesson. Elara stood before her small, gathered circle of aspiring cartographers, their faces a mix of awe and trepidation. She did not begin with rules or techniques. Instead, she asked them to simply listen to the river's soft hum, to feel the way its light seemed to respond to their quiet breaths. True mapping, she explained, does not start with a pen. It begins with a question, an open hand offered to the dream. One young man, Kale, immediately tried to capture the river's exact curve on his parchment, his brow furrowed in concentration. The ink, as it had for Elara so long ago, bled and swirled into an unrecognizable mess. He looked up, frustrated and defeated. Elara knelt beside him. You asked it to hold still, she said gently, but it is a river of stories, not stone. Ask it to show you its favorite bend, the place where it laughs the loudest. Kale tried again, this time letting his hand drift with the current of light, not against it. The line that flowed from his pen was not a perfect arc, but it was alive, shimmering with the river's own joyful energy. Another student, a woman named Lyra, connected with a tiny, shy dream of a glowing moth that had been circling the group. Instead of drawing its flight path, Lyra sketched a map of safe harbors, a series of softly glowing flowers where the moth could rest. The dream moth, sensing the intention, alighted directly on her parchment, its wings leaving faint, phosphorescent trails that became part of the map itself. The forest responded to these small acts of collaboration. The ground at their feet sprouted carpets of moss that pulsed in time with their heartbeats, and new, simple dream forms bloomed overhead, floating orbs of light that mimicked the students' careful, respectful strokes. Yet the challenge was far from simple. For every student like Lyra, there was another who struggled to quiet their own mind, to stop imposing order and start listening. Elara watched one pupil grow increasingly agitated as a playful dream of a bouncing, iridescent bubble kept evading his precise measurements. His frustration was a wall, and the dream would not let him in. She realized then that a single method would not work for all. Intuition, the very core of her own power, was a deeply personal language. She moved between them, offering not correction, but redirection. To the frustrated student, she gave a lump of soft clay. Map its rhythm with your hands, not your eyes, she instructed. To another who was overwhelmed by the sensory input, she offered a single, fragrant dream blossom and asked only for a map of its scent. She was learning to be a mentor, to see the unique geography of each student's mind, and to help them chart their own path into the art. The success of this first lesson was a quiet revolution. It proved that the forest was not a frontier to be conquered, but a partner to be understood. The harmony they created was a living precedent, a new chapter in the ancient relationship between cartographer and dream. As the session drew to a close, Lyra looked up from the banks of the river, her eyes wide. She pointed toward a distant, mist-shrouded part of the woods none of them had noted before, where the light seemed to gather in a strange, stable formation. I think, she said, her voice full of wonder, that there is an island there, a solid place I have not seen on any map. The revelation hung in the air, a gentle reminder that for all they had learned, the Whispering Woods still held its deepest secrets close. The island was not land, but a symphony of layered hopes given form. As Elara and her students stepped from their small boat of woven light onto its shore, the ground felt like solidified sunlight under their feet. The air tasted of fresh beginnings and quiet determination. Kale immediately dropped to one knee, his hand hovering over a patch of grass that chimed softly when the wind passed through it. "This place is a single emotion," he whispered, awe stripping his voice to a hushed tone. "It is hope, but not a simple one. It is the hope that persists after disappointment, the hope that is chosen, not just felt." To map it, Elara knew, would require more than one perspective. She asked Lyra to chart the textures, the way certain hopes felt rough with effort, and others were smooth with faith. She tasked Kale with the sounds, the silent hum of a long-held wish versus the bright chorus of a new one. Another student, Finn, was given the colors, the subtle shifts from the pale gold of a fragile dream to the deep, vibrant violet of an unwavering conviction. They worked not as separate surveyors, but as a single instrument, their perceptions weaving together into a living, breathing cartography. As their collaborative map took shape on a shared scroll of bark, the island itself responded. New ridges of sparkling quartz pushed up from the ground, and valleys of soft, luminous moss deepened, the geography growing more complex and robust in direct response to their harmonious understanding. It was as if their respect was the very nutrient it needed to flourish. Then the island tested them. For Lyra, the air shimmered, and she saw a vast, silent library appear, filled with every book ever lost to time, a place where she could spend eternity in peaceful, solitary study. For Kale, a vision of a perfect city, built entirely from his own flawless maps, materialized, a kingdom where every street followed his precise design. Each student was presented with a perfect, personalized paradise, a temptation to abandon the messy, collaborative work for a world of their own making. Elara faced the most potent illusion of all. Aaron stood before her, not as a spirit in a tree, but as a living man, his hand outstretched, his eyes clear and free. "We can stay here," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it. "The forest is safe. Our work is done." The pull to accept, to live in a world where her sacrifice had never been necessary, was an almost physical ache in her chest. But she looked past his shoulder and saw her students, each wrestling with their own beautiful prisons. She met Aaron's illusionary gaze, her heart breaking anew. "A true cartographer does not hide from the real map," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. The illusion dissolved like mist. One by one, her students also turned from their temptations, their loyalty to their shared purpose, and to each other stronger than any solitary dream. Having passed the test, the island revealed its core. The ground beneath the tallest hill of hope parted, revealing a cavern lined with crystals, each one containing a preserved dream from the forest's earliest days. These were not personal memories, but ancestral blueprints. The first dream of shelter, the original concept of music, the primal idea of a promise kept. This was a library of foundational wisdom, a gift for those who had proven they would not exploit it. Elara made a critical choice. She documented the archive's location and its general nature on their collaborative map, but she gave no specific instructions on how to enter it or access its knowledge. She left it as a potential, a mystery for future cartographers to discover only when they too were ready. This act of restraint, of choosing preservation over possession, resonated through the whispering woods. The trees seemed to stand a little taller, the light grew a little warmer, and she felt a new, profound layer of trust settle over her, as tangible as a cloak woven from starlight. The expedition return changed, their bonds forged into something unbreakable. They had learned that the most accurate map is drawn by many hands, and that the forest's true depth is infinite. Back at the Heartwood, as Elara stored their finished map, a deep, resonant pull drew her attention downward. A pathway she had never seen before had opened among the great roots, a tunnel that sloped gently into the earth, from which emanated the faint, intoxicating scent of dreams that have never known the waking world. The earth beneath the Heartwood was a lattice of silent power. Elara descended into the root pathways, a labyrinth where the air was thick with the scent of deep, undisturbed soil and the slow, rhythmic pulse of slumbering titans. These were not the personal dreams of mortals, but the foundational fantasies of the forest itself, the primal dream of a mountain's patience, the ancient memory of the first rainfall, the enduring concept of a seed's stubborn hope. To map them required a reverence that felt like prayer. Her silver-nibbed pen moved with a feather's touch, tracing the contours of these colossal sleeping minds, not to define them, but to acknowledge their presence. Her lines a gentle echo of their immense, steady influence on the world above. One such dream, a vast, slow-moving thought of perpetual spring, responded to her careful documentation, not with alarm, but with a weary, grateful sigh. The very root she touched softened, its bark peeling back to reveal not wood, but a portal of swirling, verdant light. From this light emerged the entity, a being woven from intertwined roots and soft moss, its form holding the profound stillness of a forgotten epoch. Its voice was the sound of a forest growing, a low, rustling hum that resonated in her bones rather than her ears. It had slept since the first cartographer gave the void its name, and it remembered the intent behind the act. Dream walking was never meant for conquest. It showed her, its thoughts flowing into her mind like clear water. It was conceived as a dialogue, a way for the waking world to remind the world of dreams that it was loved, and for the world of dreams to lend its boundless creativity to the waking mind. This sacred exchange was the forest's true purpose. The weight of this revelation was immense. To share it carelessly would be to risk the same arrogance that had first created the nightmare. The knowledge of these root dreams was a responsibility that could shatter the world if placed in the wrong hands. Emerging from the profound silence of the roots, Elara gathered only Lyra and Kale, the students who had turned from their personal paradises on the island of hope. She led them to a hidden grove where the trees grew in a perfect, soundless circle. Here, they began a new archive, inscribing the ancient truths not on parchment, but onto leaves that would return to the soil when read, their knowledge recycled into the forest's own memory. This would be a library with no fixed location, its contents protected by trust and the land itself. As they sealed the first of these living records, the ancient entity's final warning echoed in Elara's soul. It spoke of a dream eclipse, a celestial event in the dreamscape that occurred once every great age, when the flow of new dreams would slow to a trickle, and the oldest nightmares would stir in the deepening gloom. The last one had nearly unraveled the forest, leading to the schism that created the first great nightmare. The next was due, its approach already a subtle pressure in the fabric of the realm. Elara stepped back out into the open air, the wisdom of the roots a heavy mantle on her shoulders. She looked up, and a cold dread trickled down her spine. The vibrant, ever-shifting colors of the dream sky were fading, the light leaching away into a dull, twilight gray. The first long shadows of the prophesied eclipse were stretching across the woods. The sky's fading light was a silent alarm. Elara moved with a quiet urgency, summoning her cartographers not with a shout, but with a shared pulse of intention that resonated through the dream trees. Their task was monumental, to fortify the forest's most vulnerable points before the eclipse plunged the realm into its greatest trial. They did not build walls of stone, but barriers of concentrated narrative, weaving together threads of resilient dreams, the unwavering hope of the island, the stubborn patience of the root titans, into shimmering shields of light. Lyra and her team charted contingency routes, not as escape paths, but as guided channels, mapping safe passages to the Heartwood's protective aura for any dream that felt its stability waver. The forest responded to their efforts with a surge of collective will. Dream entities, from the gentle memory keepers to the playful light sprites, voluntarily offered slivers of their own essence to strengthen the barriers. A grove of trees that held the dreams of peaceful slumber leaned their branches together, their combined tranquility forming a dome of calm over a particularly volatile region. This was not a command, but a covenant, a unified trust that hummed through the very air. Yet, resistance flickered in the shadows. Some dreams, especially the oldest and most fragile, clung stubbornly to their familiar groves. A sentient thicket, woven from the dream of a perfect, unchanging garden, recoiled from Lyra's guidance, its thorns bristling with a fear of any disruption to its delicate order. It was not malice, but terror of the unknown. Elara watched this friction, and knew force would only fracture the trust they had built. Her decision was a subtle revolution. She instituted a rotation, pairing each cartographer with a dream entity as a partner. Kale found himself working alongside the very thicket that had resisted him. Instead of demanding it move, he spent a day mapping its intricate, perfect patterns, his respect slowly soothing its anxiety. In turn, the thicket showed him hidden pathways only a rooted dream could know. This cooperation transformed the preparation from a defense into a dialogue, melting resistance through mutual understanding. Then the ground trembled. A minor dream quake, the first of many, shuddered through the woods. It was a low, visceral groan that tested their fortifications in an instant. One of their newly woven barriers flickered violently under the psychic shockwave, and for a heart-stopping moment, Elara feared it would shatter. But the collective energy poured into it held, the shield steadying as the tremor passed. The quake was a grim confirmation, the forest's pain making the theoretical threat terrifyingly real. Their work was not an exercise, it was a race against a collapsing clock. On the eve of the eclipse, Elara gathered everyone at the Heartwood. Cartographers and dream entities stood side by side in the clearing, their faces illuminated by the tree's soft, steadfast glow. The air was thick, not with fear, but with a hardened resolve. She did not give a grand speech. She simply met the eyes of her students and their partners, her silent gratitude echoing the trust they had all placed in one another. The final briefing was a quiet acknowledgement of their shared purpose, a final breath before the long night began. The sky bruised to a deep, unsettling purple, and all sound ceased. The dream eclipse had begun. At the Heartwood, Elara pressed her palms against the ancient bark, the constellation map blazing in her mind's eye. She became a conduit, channeling the tree's immense stabilizing energy through the network of prepared barriers. She felt the initial waves of distortion hit, a psychic tremor that sought to twist hopeful dreams into grotesque parodies. The shield's Lyra and the others had woven flared bright, holding the line. For a moment, it seemed their preparation would be enough. Then she felt it, a sickening fissure deep within the Heartwood itself. The ancient prison, stressed by the eclipse's unique energy, had developed a hairline crack. A thin, corrosive mist of the nightmare's residual essence began to leak out, a poison that threatened to unravel their defenses from the inside. Elara's consciousness split. One part of her mind remained fixed on the broader battle, directing pulses of calming energy to a grove of fearful dream trees. The other part focused on the crack, a desperate, draining effort to contain the seeping malice. It was like trying to hold a ruptured dam together with her bare hands, while also commanding an army. The dual strain was immense, a searing headache blooming behind her eyes. She could not do both. Taking a breath that felt like shattering glass, she made a choice. She reached out through the dreamscape, her voice a calm, clear signal to Lyra and Kale. The eastern sector is yours. Stabilize the memory groves. Kale, the northern light sprites are panicking. Guide them. There was no hesitation in their response, only a swift, confident acknowledgement. They were no longer just students. They were stewards, and her trust in them was now the bedrock of their defense. But the fissure was widening, fed by the deepening eclipse. Ghastly echoes of the consumed nightmare shadows of pure hunger and regret began to coalesce in the air around the Heartwood's base. The cartographers realized with a jolt of collective dread that mere reinforcement was a temporary measure. To save the forest, they had to seal the breach completely, and they had to do it now, during the eclipse's most potent and dangerous peak. With the very ground trembling underfoot, Elara gathered Lyra, Kale, and Finn. Her gaze was steady, her resolve a tangible force. "We go to the wound itself," she said. "We will not just patch it. We will heal it with a map of absolute unity." The small team moved as one, pushing through the chaotic energy toward the source of the bleed, ready to offer everything they had. The crack in the Heartwood pulsed like an infected wound, weeping a thin, black mist that tasted of rust and old sorrow. Elara and her team did not attack the seepage. They surrounded it, their hands not holding tools but extended, palms open. Together, they began to weave. Lyra pulled a thread of resilient hope from the island's core. Kale a strand of deep, geological patience from the root dreams, and Finn a filament of pure, collaborative joy from their shared lessons. They did not patch the old prison. They embroidered a new story directly over the fissure, a living tapestry of all they had learned. The nightmare's echoes fought back, not with claws, but with psychic shrieks that manifested as jagged shards of crystallized fear flying toward them. The other cartographers and dream entities raised their combined shields, deflecting the assault, buying the weaver's precious seconds. Elara, at the center, felt the immense strain of holding the pattern together. To anchor it, to make it permanent, She had to give it a piece of her own signature, the unique energy that let her walk in dreams. She poured her own dream, walking essence into the weave, feeling a fundamental part of her identity unravel and stitch itself into the forest's foundation. A terrifying emptiness opened within her. For a dizzying moment, she feared she was dissolving, that the individual named Elara would be lost forever in the vast, humming chorus of the woods. But as the last thread of her essence tied the knot, the crack sealed with a sound like a final, grateful sigh. The black mist vanished, and the prison wall was now stronger, shimmering with the vibrant, complex patterns of their collective effort. The immediate victory left her on her knees, breathless and hollowed out. Her connection to the forest was no longer that of a guardian looking in. It was the intimate, inseparable connection of a root to the tree. She could feel the forest's joy as her own slight smile, its lingering aches as a faint tiredness in her bones. She had not lost herself, but herself had expanded to include the woods. Looking at the exhausted, triumphant faces of her team, she saw the same subtle shift in their eyes. They were all more intertwined now. "These are not wounds," she told them, her voice raspy but clear. "They are bonds. They are the maps we have become." As the eclipse finally released its grip, and the first true light of the restored dream sky broke overhead, the forest did not simply recover. It erupted. Trees bloomed with leaves of living light, flowers opened that sang in soft harmonies, and the air itself thickened with a creativity so potent it felt like walking through a waterfall of new ideas. The sealed nightmare's energy, now fully integrated and balanced, no longer festered as a poison, but circulated as a vital nutrient, giving the realm a depth and resilience it had never known before. And within that glorious, collective sigh of relief, Elara felt a singular, new dream taking root in the fertile soil of their shared victory. A dream not of fragile peace, but of unbreakable, enduring unity. The idea for the festival bloomed as naturally as a dream of spring. Elara envisioned a celebration, not of conquest, but of connection, where the cartographers and the dream entities would work side by side to create temporary, breathtaking installations. These would not be monuments, but living maps of their shared history, woven from light, memory, and collective joy. A grove was chosen where the trees hummed with a particularly harmonious frequency, and the work began. Cartographers sketched frameworks of intention on the air itself, while dream sprites filled them with shimmering color. Memory keepers projected vivid tableaus of their favorite moments: the building of the Hope Bridge, the quiet integration of the Warden, the triumphant sealing of the Heartwood. The air thrummed with a creative energy so potent it felt like walking through a symphony. Managing the event was a delicate cartography in itself. Elara moved constantly through the preparations, her senses attuned to the subtle pressures in the air. A pavilion of solidified laughter was positioned a little too close to a grove of delicate, silent dreams, and she gently guided the builders to a more suitable clearing. She ensured the vibrant, chaotic energy of an installation, mapping their battle with the nightmare, was buffered by a serene exhibit of root dream patience. Her every decision was a balancing act, a reminder that even joy, in its most potent form, must be channeled with care to avoid overwhelming the very peace they celebrated. The true test of her vision, however, was the dream exchange. It was a radical proposal. Cartographers would briefly experience the world through the senses of a dream entity, feeling the weight of a memory or the dizzying freedom of a fledgling hope. In return, the dreams would borrow the cartographer's focus, seeing their own essence through the lens of structure and narrative. The risk was palpable. Could a human mind withstand the raw, unfiltered input of a primal concept? Could a simple dream of a sunset understand the responsibility of being mapped? Lyra was the first to volunteer, merging her awareness with a gentle dream of a babbling brook. For a few minutes, she was not a cartographer, but the water itself, feeling the cool certainty of her own flow and the gentle resistance of the stones she had spent eternity smoothing. When she returned to herself, tears streamed down her face. "I never understood," she whispered, "how much patience is in every single moment." On the other side, the brook dream, having seen itself through Lyra's meticulous charts, began to consciously adjust its flow into more melodious patterns, having learned the beauty of intention. This profound empathy, flowing in both directions, was the festival's greatest triumph. As the final installation, a colossal, spinning galaxy of shared memories, ascended into the dream sky, the forest itself responded. New paths of shimmering pearl and polished obsidian spontaneously unspooled from the festival grounds, branching off into uncharted territories. These were not paths made by feet, but by the forest's own healthy, expansive growth, a direct result of the unity thrumming through its roots and branches. The festival's roaring success cemented it as an annual tradition, a sacred renewal of the covenant between keeper and kept. As the brilliant colors of the celebrations began to gently fade into the forest's soft nightly hum, a young cartographer, one of the newest, approached Elara. He held a simple map of the festival grounds, his hand trembling slightly. "The work we do here is magnificent," he began, his voice full of awe and a flicker of restless curiosity. "But I cannot help but wonder, what lies beyond the whispering woods? Are there other dreamscapes waiting for a cartographer's hand?" The young cartographer's question lingered in the air long after the festival's last light had faded. Other dreamscapes. Elara found herself standing once more in the cavern of the Constellation Archive, the swirling map of a billion sleeping minds revolving slowly above her. She sought the oldest entity, the being of roots and moss, and posed the question not with words, but with the focused curiosity shimmering in her own spirit. The entity's response was a slow, geological unfurling of memory. It showed her that their whispering woods was not a singular island, but one tree in a vast, unseen forest. The first cartographer had known of these other realms, and had even charted pathways to them, delicate threads of connection woven from shared dream stuff. The archive itself confirmed it. As she focused her will, entire new sections of the starry ceiling ignited, revealing constellations that were not dreams, but gateways. Faded, shimmering lines connected their familiar stars to distant, foreign clusters of light, each one a potential world of its own. One map depicted a realm of liquid thought, where entire civilizations rose and fell in the space of a single deep breath. Another showed a desert of pure silence under a sky of frozen metaphor. The sheer scale of it was humbling and terrifying. Her cartographer's soul yearned to trace those lines, to step onto shores no waking or dreaming mind had ever documented. But the leader who had sealed the Heartwood felt a cold dread. Every one of those faded pathways was a potential door, and doors swing both ways. What if their hard-won peace attracted attention from something out there. What if her curiosity became a new crack in their world's foundation, an invitation they could not rescind? The weight of the decision was a physical pressure. She could pour their resources into rebuilding those ancient bridges, sending out explorers into the absolute unknown. It was the ultimate cartographic quest. But it would mean diverting attention, energy, and guardians away from the realm they had just healed. It would mean risking everything they had built for a possibility. Her choice was not born of fear, but of profound responsibility. She would not be the cartographer who abandoned her first map before the ink was dry. Rolling the celestial charts with deliberate care, she made her decree. Their primary duty was to the Whispering Woods. They would use this time of peace not for reckless exploration, but for deepening their roots. She would train more stewards until their network of guardians was so interwoven and resilient that it could withstand any shock, whether from within or from beyond. Only then, with a secure home to return to, would they even consider following those fated pathways. She stored the external maps in the most secure part of the living archive, the one that returned knowledge to the soil. Upon the case, she did not write a warning, but a promise, a single word etched in starlight. Eventually, this decision ushered in a new era, not of frantic exploration, but of deliberate cultivation. The forest, sensing its guardian's unwavering focus, settled into a deep and vibrant peace, its dreams blooming with a creative confidence that came from feeling utterly secure. It was a golden age of preparation, where every lesson taught and every barrier strengthened was not just about defense, but about building a foundation sturdy enough to someday support a journey to the stars. The words of the oath were not written on parchment, but on the air itself, shimmering before the new recruits gathered at the Heartwood. Elara spoke them clearly, each syllable a thread woven into the forest's consciousness. I will map with empathy, seeing the dreamer in the dream. I will act with courage, not to conquer fear, but to understand its shape. I will walk with respect, for the path I chart is a shared creation, not a possession. As each novice repeated the vow, a subtle change occurred. The surrounding dream trees seemed to lean in, their leaves brushing gently against the oath-taker's shoulders, and a faint, protective luminescence settled over them like a second skin. The forest itself was acknowledging their promise, granting them a sliver of its own resilience in return for their sworn guardianship. Crafting this oath had been her most delicate work. It had to be a compass, not a cage. The principles were unwavering, a direct response to the arrogance and fear that had nearly destroyed everything. Yet its application had to be as fluid as the river of starlight, allowing for the unique intuition of each cartographer to find its own expression. The most critical clause, born from her hardest lessons, required consultation with the dream entities before any significant alteration. This was not a request for permission, but a demand for partnership, ensuring that the mapped would always have a voice in the hand that held the pen. By making this oath the foundation of their new tradition, Elara was building a system meant to outlast her. The cartographer guardians were no longer a loose group of explorers, but a permanent, integrated part of the forest's immune system, trusted because their first loyalty was sworn to the realm they served. This institutionalization of wisdom was their greatest defense against the slow creep of forgotten history and the lure of old, destructive habits. After the solemn ceremony, as the new guardians dispersed to begin their work, Elara found herself walking alone through the grove of crystalline memories. The same trees that had once felt alien and threatening now felt like old friends. She paused by the river of Starlight, its banks no longer twisting from her touch, but flowing in harmonious patterns that reflected the new stability. Her first map here had been a frantic, rebellious act against a world she did not understand. Now, her greatest contribution was not a single chart, but a living promise passed on to others. The weight of leadership was still there, but it was no longer a burden she carried alone. It was a responsibility shared by every voice that had sworn the oath, a symphony of intent that would guide the whispering woods for generations to come. The bark of the memory tree felt cool and familiar beneath Elara's palm. This was the very tree where she had once touched a stranger's dream of flight, but today she came not to witness, but to give. Closing her eyes, she pressed her forehead to the smooth, pale wood and offered it her most cherished, painful memory, the searing light of Aaron's spirit as he wove himself into the heartwood, a final act of love that was not an ending, but a transformation. She did not push the memory away as a source of grief, but offered it as a gift, a story of sacrifice that deserved to be rooted alongside all the others. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft, silver light bloomed from the point of contact, spreading through the branches like liquid moonlight. Where there had been only crystalline shards, delicate silver flowers now unfurled, their petals holding the quiet, potent essence of hope, born from ultimate cost. The grove itself seemed to hold its breath, and then the other trees began to resonate, their own memories glowing a little brighter, a little clearer, as if Aaron's story had given them a new language for courage. This single act transformed the grove. Almost immediately, other cartographer guardians felt the shift in the forest's hum and were drawn to the site. They came not to map, but to remember, to place a hand upon the silver blossoms and feel the echo of that willing sacrifice. It became a place of pilgrimage, a living lesson for any guardian who felt the weight of their duty. A young apprentice, struggling with a fear of failure, would touch a flower and understand that true strength was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The grove was no longer just an archive of personal dreams. It was now a testament to their shared history, a wellspring of resolve for the entire community. Watching them, Elara felt a profound and bittersweet ache. The public symbol of hope was also the private touchstone of her deepest loss. How could she be both the grieving student and the steadfast leader? The adoration in their eyes was a mirror reflecting a person who had integrated her pain. But inside, the lonely echo of that final moment with Aaron remained. She knew then that her personal journey and her public role could not be separated. One had irrevocably shaped the other, and if that was true, then her most valuable offering would not be a monument, but a manual. She returned to her quarters and unrolled a fresh, blank scroll, her silver-nibbed pen poised above it. This would not be a dry chronicle of rules, but a living guidebook, weaving together the technical precision of her maps with the hard-won wisdom of her heart. She began with the river of Starlight, explaining not just how to chart its ever-changing course, but why a cartographer must first ask the river to show them its favorite bend. She detailed the emotional cartography of the Warden of Fear, not as a battle to be won, but as a landscape to be understood and integrated. Every lesson, every near disaster, was transcribed with unflinching honesty, creating a resource that would ensure her knowledge and Erin's legacy would endure long after her own footsteps had faded from the mossy paths. As she finished the first entry, a familiar, warm pressure brushed against her mind, a sensation like a root gently tapping her shoulder. It was an invitation from the Heartwood. Setting her pen aside, she walked to the great tree and placed her hand upon its bark. The connection was instantaneous. Her awareness flowed down through the roots into the deepest, most fertile layer of the dreamscape, where she witnessed something unprecedented. A new dream was taking form, not from a single sleeper, but from the collective consciousness of the cartographers and the dream entities themselves. It was a nascent, pulsing orb of light, and within its core, she could see the intertwined patterns of their oath, the memory of the festival, and the resilient hope of the silver flowers. This was a dream of unity, a new archetype born not from a single mind, but from the healed and harmonious world they had built together. Their collective breath seemed to still as the first shared dream began to form. It did not rise from a single sleeper, but coalesced from the air itself, a swirling nebula of donated hopes. One cartographer offered a memory of a perfectly synchronized flock of birds, while a dream entity provided the resonant hum of 1,000 strings tuned to the same note. Elara herself gave the quiet, steady rhythm of a heartbeat felt in unison. Their task was not to direct this birth, but to midwife it, to ensure that no single note overpowered the symphony. The challenge was immense, a delicate exercise in dream democracy. A cartographer's desire for perfect geometric order threatened to rigidify the dream's fluid edges, while a playful sprite's impulse for constant, chaotic change risked dissolving its core structure. Elara moved between them, a guide rather than a commander. She asked the cartographer to map the beauty of a meandering river, not a straight canal, and she helped the sprite understand that even the most joyful dance needs a stable floor. They were learning to listen not just to each other, but to the spaces between their contributions, to the harmony that could only exist through compromise. As they worked, the dream stabilized, its light shifting from a frantic flicker to a deep, resonant pulse. It settled into a form that was both a living forest and a grand architectural marvel, where roots were also musical chords and branches were pathways of light. This was no fragile fantasy. It was inherently stable because its foundation was not a solitary mind, but a community's trust. The moment it fully solidified, a wave of profound harmony radiated outward. Dream trees in distant groves straightened, their leaves aligning in more intricate patterns. Simple dreams of light began to cluster, forming complex, chandelier-like structures that sang soft, collective melodies. The forest was not just healing anymore, it was evolving, learning from their example. Elara knew this could not be a singular event. To ensure its legacy, she immediately gathered a circle of senior cartographers and elder dream entities. "We will not command future creations," she declared. "We will serve as a council, a forum to balance voices and ensure that every collective dream is born from true partnership." This was the final, crucial step in decentralizing her own authority, transforming her leadership from a solitary torch into a network of lanterns, each capable of guiding the way. The success of this first shared dream was more than a victory. It was a new blueprint for existence. It proved that the forest's future did not depend on a single hero's sacrifice, but on the daily, conscious choice to build together. Watching the collective dream pulse at the center of their community, its light warm and unwavering, Elara felt a deep, quiet fulfillment that eased the old aches in her soul. Her work was not over, but its nature had changed. Her gaze softened as it fell upon Lyra, patiently guiding a young apprentice, and Kale, deep in discussion with a sentient thicket. The true map of the future was not drawn on parchment, but was being written in the capable hands of those she had taught. The river of Starlight flowed with a new, deeper resonance, its currents now threaded with the silver of shared memory and the gold of hard-won unity. It was along these familiar, yet ever-changing, banks that Elara began to walk with Kale. The young cartographer had always shown a rare gift, not just for mapping the forest's geography, but for understanding its voice. Where others saw a chaotic grove, Kale heard a chorus. His talent was for the primal dreams, the foundational concepts of stone and stream, and Elara knew such an instinct could not be taught from a scroll. It had to be nurtured in the wild, uncharted depths. Their journeys took them to places where the air was thick with the scent of pre-dawn, and the dreams were so old they had no words, only pure sensation. Kale would sit for hours, his hand resting on a moss-covered boulder that dreamed of continental drift, not drawing, but listening. He learned to map the pressure of a deep roots, ambition not with lines, but with a series of textured dots that conveyed its slow, immense patience. His techniques were revolutionary because they were born of empathy, not control. He taught the other cartographers how to sketch a map of a brook's laughter, a chart that would guide the water to find its most joyful path, rather than forcing it into a predetermined course. This symbiosis was the future Elara had fought for, yet watching it unfold was its own unique challenge. She saw Kale preparing to chart a volatile dream of a nascent volcano, his approach bold and intuitive. Every fiber of her being screamed to intervene, to point out the risks, to show him the safer, more measured path she would have taken. Letting him make his own mistakes felt like watching him walk toward a cliff's edge in the dark. She had to consciously unclench her hands, to bite back her warnings and allow him the space to learn, even if that learning came from a singed parchment or a temporarily startled dream. Kale, for his part, felt the weight of her gaze. He respected her immeasurably, but her caution could feel like a cage. He was eager to prove that his generation could build upon her foundations without being constrained by them. The tension was a quiet hum between them, a natural friction between the wisdom of experience and the passion of innovation. The breaking point was a minor project, a mapping of a grove where the dreams of sunlight had become tangled and weak. Elara made a deliberate decision. She placed the primary map in Kale's hands. "You understand the light's language better than I do," she told him, her voice calm despite the tremor in her spirit. "This is your chart to draw. I will be here if you need me, but the lead is yours." It was the ultimate test of her growth as a mentor, to trust not just his success, but his potential failure. For 3 days, Kale worked alone. He did not try to force the light into a stronger pattern. Instead, he mapped the grove's history, discovering that a forgotten dream of a prolonged eclipse had cast a long shadow. He then crafted a new map, not of the light itself, but of the shadow's end, a narrative cartography that showed the sunlight how to remember its own strength. When he was finished, the grove did not just brighten, it erupted in a cascade of prismatic color, each beam harmonizing with the others in a way no one had ever seen. His success was a quiet triumph that resonated through the community. The other cartographers looked at Kale with a new respect, and the dream entities responded to his maps with an eager, trusting energy. It was proof that the forest's future was not a fragile heirloom to be protected, but a living, growing legacy, perfectly secure in the hands of the next generation. After they debriefed, Elara walked alone to the Starlight River. She watched its flow, and a profound peace settled over her. The liquid light now swirled with the distinct violet of Kale's breakthrough and the steady silver of her released control, a beautiful, ever-evolving record of their collective journey. The river's flow was no longer just light, but a tapestry woven from every story they had ever safeguarded. Elara knelt at its bank, her silver-nibbed pen moving not to constrain, but to converse. She sketched the shimmering violet of Kale's breakthrough, the steady silver of shared sacrifice, and the vibrant gold of the first collective dream. As her pen traced these echoes, the parchment itself began to breathe, its lines shifting and pulsing in perfect sync with the forest's own rhythm. This was not a record of the past, but a living, beating heart of the present, a dynamic map of the wood's vitality. It became their central compass. A sudden dimming in a grove of memory trees would appear as a faint flicker on the map, allowing a cartographer to arrive with a map of solace long before despair could take root. A surge of chaotic energy near the island of hope would glow a warning amber, signaling the need for gentle guidance. The map translated the forest's whispers into a language they could all understand. Yet its sensitivity was a constant negotiation. Set it too high, and the normal, healthy turbulence of a new dream's birth would trigger a cascade of false alarms, exhausting their resources and numbing their vigilance. Set it too low, and a genuine, festering wound could fester unseen until it was too late. Elara spent days in quiet contemplation, adjusting the map's resonance not with calculations, but with intuition, learning to distinguish between the growing pains of creation and the first tremors of true discord. It was a delicate art, this listening. Her most radical decision was one of absolute trust. She opened the map's access to every dream entity in the woods. The sentient thicket, the playful light sprites, the ancient root titans, all could now see the flow of their collective well-being. It was an act that dissolved the final barrier between cartographer and dream. They were no longer separate guardians watching over the realm. They were all nodes in a single, conscious network of care. This transparency forged an unprecedented collective vigilance, but it also distributed the weight of their world equally across every pair of shoulders. A crisis was no longer a solitary burden for a lone hero to bear. It would be a call to arms for an entire ecosystem. As Elara watched the living map glow with a steady, harmonious light, a new pattern suddenly bloomed at its very edge. It was a color she had never seen before, a deep, resonant indigo that pulsed with a rhythm alien to their woods. It was not a cry for help or a surge of chaos. It was a question. A single, coherent dream from a realm beyond their own was gently, persistently seeking a connection. The map, their great tool of internal balance, had just become a receiver for a voice from the outside. The indigo signal on the living map coalesced into a being of woven light and shifting geometry. It introduced itself as a messenger from the Empyrean Sea, a dreamscape of liquid thought. Elara and her council knew their first contact must be flawless, a demonstration of their unity. They did not meet in a fixed location, but collaborated to weave one. Cartographers sketched frameworks of serene stability, while dream entities supplied the substance, a pavilion of solidified trust, floating above the river of Starlight, its very architecture a map of peaceful intent. The messenger moved through this space, its form rippling with what might have been approval. It spoke of civilizations that dreamed in symphonies and deserts, where metaphors fossilized, revealing a cosmos of dreamscapes vaster than they had ever conceived. The initial talks were a success, built on a shared language of cartography, and they agreed to a small, carefully structured knowledge exchange. A single cartographer would travel to the Empyrean Sea, while one of its liquid thinkers would come to the Whispering Woods. Yet, beneath the diplomatic progress, tension simmered. On the council, Kale argued passionately for the exchange, seeing infinite potential for growth. Others, like the Elder Memory Keepers, voiced a deep-seated fear. Would their unique harmony be diluted by foreign concepts? Could they trust a map they had not drawn themselves? The messenger itself offered a cryptic, sobering warning. Not all realms are as welcoming as yours, it conveyed. The wider dream verse holds ancient hungers that consume lesser worlds, and echoes of a schism that shattered a primordial alliance. Listening to both the hope and the fear, Elara made her decision. We will not hide behind our walls, nor will we throw our gates open wide, she declared. We will extend a single, careful hand. She approved the initial exchange, a trial run that would allow them to learn and assess without irrevocably binding their future. This first step into the greater dream verse was a monumental leap. It promised access to wisdom that could elevate their stewardship to unimaginable heights, but it also exposed their carefully healed realm to dangers they could not yet map. After the messenger dissolved back into the map's edge, its indigo light fading to a steady pulse, Elara walked alone to the Constellation Archive. She looked up at the starry pathways, no longer just lines on a ceiling, but potential roads. Their story was no longer a solitary song, but a single verse in an epic, cosmic poem, and the next chapter was waiting to be written. A deep, resonant crack echoed not through the air, but through the very substance of the forest. It came from the Heartwood, the collective dream, their shared heart of unity, convulsed as a shard of the ancient nightmare, sharpened by the fading eclipse's dark energy, pierced its luminous core. It was a parasite of pure negation, and it began to unravel the symphony of trust from the inside, twisting harmonious light into dissonant, jealous shadows. Elara felt it as a searing cold in her own spirit. This was the final echo of the old war, and it was attacking the very symbol of their new peace. Her first instinct was to fight, to excise the corruption with all the power she commanded. But the lessons of the Warden, of the root dreams of Aaron's sacrifice, rose within her. Force had only ever created a stronger prison. To truly win, she had to offer a different story. She reached out, not to the collective dream, but to the shard itself, mapping its chaotic, hungry essence. She saw its origin not as a monster, but as a dream of connection that had been twisted by eons of isolation and fear. It was a story of wanting to belong, perverted into a need to consume. With this terrible, empathic understanding, she made her choice. She would not destroy the shard. She would rewrite it, calling upon every cartographer and dream entity. She directed them not to attack, but to weave. Lyra spun threads of forgiveness, Kale strands of resilience. The memory keepers offered tales of redemption. They wove a new narrative around the shard, a cocoon of possibility. But to anchor it, to make the transformation permanent, required a catalyst of immense personal power. Elara stepped into the turbulent core of the collective dream, placing her hands on the seething, black shard. She offered it her most vulnerable map, the one she had kept locked in the deepest part of her soul, the cartography of her own deepest fear of failure and her ultimate hope for the future. She poured her own dream walking essence, the very source of her identity, directly into the nightmare's heart. The pain was excruciating, a feeling of her own self unraveling. For a terrifying moment, she was adrift, her connection to the whispering woods stretching to a single, fraying thread. She was sacrificing her place in the world she had saved to save the world itself. Then the cocoon of narratives ignited. The shard did not vanish. It transformed. The black, jagged forms softened, its edges blurring into a deep, compassionate violet. The energy that had sought to consume now sought to understand. It had become a guardian of second chances, a sentinel that would forever patrol the borders between despair and hope, equipped with the unique knowledge of how one could become the other. As Elara's knees buckled, the forest did not let her fall. 1,000 threads of light, woven from the gratitude of every dream she had ever nurtured, caught her. Her connection snapped back, not as it was, but stronger and more profound, now intertwined with this new, redeemed guardian. She had not just preserved their unity, she had expanded its definition. Her legacy was no longer written in the maps of places she had charted, but in the boundless, living map of what a broken thing could become when offered a chance to heal. The edge of the whispering woods was no longer a boundary, but a threshold of endless possibility. Elara stood there now, a revered sage whose silver hair held the glint of 1,000 mapped stars, her presence as steady and calming as the ancient Heartwood itself. She watched a new group of cartographer guardians prepare for their first independent expedition, their faces alight with a familiar mix of trepidation and wonder. They carried maps woven from living bark and tools that hummed in harmony with the forest, their oaths a quiet song on their lips. They did not see her as a distant legend, but as their first and most trusted mentor, a living part of the landscape they had sworn to protect. The forest around them was a symphony of interconnected life, more vibrant and resilient than any single dream could ever be. Its colors were deeper, its melodies more complex, a testament to the delicate, powerful balance they had forged between the courage to explore and the wisdom to preserve. In the quiet moments, she still felt the shape of Aaron's absence, a hollow space that would never truly fill. Yet his sacrifice was not a monument of sorrow, but a living current in the forest's flow. She saw it in the unwavering stability of a dream that had once been fragile, and heard it in the confident voice of a young guardian reciting her vows. His choice had planted the seed for this enduring peace. A profound contentment settled within her, as deep and quiet as the root dreams. Her own journey, from a solitary mapmaker to the architect of this new era, was complete. The work of charting the unknown, both within the heart and beyond the next horizon, was now a legacy entrusted to countless hands. It would continue, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living story, forever evolving, just like the boundless, cherished dreams they served.